So we are broadcasting for the first time from the new apartment, which is why the bookcases behind me are mostly empty, not entirely empty. Harold Nichols has picked up Bloodspace and Moondust today. I hope you enjoy that. It's our first Starfinder-compatible adventure, one of the things that we had out really early to support Starfinder from Rogue Genius. So this is the Aftergame. This is my beta podcast test thing, which I'm... Too bad there isn't a lower third for Facebook Live. Oh, so crawl or something, yeah.
If you click on his face, it will take up your whole screen if that's what you're interested in.
I think they're just saying I could put a crawl or something across the bottom and tell people what's going on. So we do actually have a topic this time. We will also be doing some Q&A stuff. My wife is, LJ, is here to my right, which is not going to look correct. There she is. So she'll be looking at the feed and gathering questions and stuff. So if they're on topic, we'll get to them immediately, and if they're off topic, we'll try and get to them towards the end of the show. I'm going to go for roughly an hour because, honestly, I haven't had dinner yet. And we'll see how that goes. This is all still very much in beta, and we will see how it all works out. Oh, Louise says hi.
Oh, hi, Louise.
So this is a topic-themed show, which we've not done before. Which we haven't done before, and we'll see how people respond to that and how it goes. And again, it's all just grist for the mill for the moment until we figure out what we're doing with this show.
Hang on. Hello, Lita. Hi, Michael. Hello, Brandon. Hello, everybody.
Okay, LJ, type hi in the comments now. Yeah. All right, so playtesting. I want to make it clear, for starters, that I am here in my capacity as a person who has been freelancing for the tabletop and mostly RPG community for 20 years, and not in my capacity as an employee or publisher or consultant for any specific company. That said, I've been involved in a lot of playtests. I have been a playtester, actually going back more than 20 years, for everything from major RPG releases to quirky little card games that never actually made it out, to a series of LARP rules, which the whole game didn't make it out, but those LARP rules were used in one edition of a live-action LARP and then replaced in the second edition.
A live-action role-playing game?
Yes, a live-action role-playing game. So I've run a number of playtests, ranging from playtests for adventures I've written, playtests for rules material I've released or worked on, all the way up to formal playtests, most recently for Starfinder, where I ran the closed playtest we had. So what is a playtest? A playtest is an opportunity to play either an entire game or parts of a game to see how the rules you have written are interpreted and interact with the wild. And there are a number of different degrees of playtesting and levels of playtesting. First, playtesting comes, in my opinion, in three forms. There's what I call internal playtesting, by which I specifically mean playtesting being done by people who are working on the game. This is distinct from theory crafting, right? If I sit down and I think, hey, I've got an interesting idea for a mechanic, and I write it up, and I think about all the ways that could go wrong, that's theory crafting. And that is an important part of designing a game. And there's a lot of statistics and numbers and probabilities and time consumption that you can look at and consider when you're theory crafting a game. But there's also a lot of stuff that tends not to come up until you're actually playing it. So for an internal playtest, from my point of view, and I don't know that there are universal terms here, the people that are working on a game play some part of the game and see how well that works. If you're talking about a video game, sometimes people use the term vertical slice, which refers to a specific part of the game that you are testing. One of the things that you have to consider when you're talking about something as complex as a role-playing game, is there a Theorycraft DC for Starfinder, is asked. Yes, it is 10 plus 1/2 the CR of the game. Sorry, inside joke. When you are playtesting something, it can be very difficult to playtest any given bit until the whole thing is put together. So, for example, if you are writing, let us say something like Starfinder, and you're starting with a similar game, and you make one change, let's say you're going to change how hit points work. You can change that one thing and use all the other rules from your previous iteration, but that means that you're going to run into places where you have not yet adjusted those other rules for the thing you have changed. Now, some of that is a good thing, because as you're going along, you can say, oh, healing interacts with hit points. We've got to think about what we're doing with that. Or we're going to create a new mechanic called resolve points, so we don't even know how that'll work yet, but that'll somehow let you heal. Those are the sorts of things that you have to play test individually in little bursts to see if they work independently. and then you can put things together to see if they all work together. And frequently, if you're doing a class and level-based game, you might say, hey, what are our most important or most varied classes? It's pretty common if you're doing a D20 game to say, well, we need something like a wizard and something like a fighter and something like a rogue and something like a cleric, because those are sort of iconic roles of the game. And if you can get the core engine, the things that we call the tactical rules in Starfinder, you can get that core engine of the game to work, you can then add to it, subtract from it, tweak it, but you have something that runs all by itself. You can also frequently say, hey, we're going to start with 1st through 5th level, and then 6th through 10th, et cetera, so that you can do these little parts. And that tends to all be internal playtesting. Some of that may break into alpha playtesting. And alpha playtesting is when you have most of a game and you are seeing how all your assumptions work together and what's going on with their interaction. I'm going to interrupt here because I've got... from Michael Windinger-Nuttall, is the PF2 playtest going to be in chunks or all at once? If it's in chunks, we're going to get to see base classes early. Noting that I am here just as a member of the industry, the following answers are all things that I have gleaned from the frequently asked questions on the Paizo.com Pathfinder playtest rules. The playtest is actually going to begin in August. It will be released at Gen Con. It'll be available for free in PDF. But also in print form, which you can buy softback or hardback or some sort of specialty edition. And there will be an entire base playable game at that time. So in that regards, it'll be all at once, and that's going to be a beta playtest, and I will get into what that means here in a little bit. But they are going to be playtesting over a number of months. I don't remember exactly how long Paizo has said it's going to take, but I know that it is at least a few months. And they will be asking people to look at specific parts of the game over specific periods of time for feedback purposes. And I will get into the feedback mechanism, what the various feedback mechanisms are in playtesting later. But since a lot of people obviously are thinking about the Pathfinder playtest, it's relevant for this Aftergame broadcast to talk about a little bit, because I think it's the playtest on most people in the RPGs industry minds right now.
Next question.
No, I didn't.
Thomas Plain Sides.
It's not out here, so just tell me.
I was curious if anyone had looked at the Book of Experimental Might for possible ideas for theorycraft for PF2.
Since I'm not on the PF2 team, I can't tell you for certain what they do and don't look at. I know that when I am designing any game, honestly, I want to look at what the state of the game industry is and what ideas are all around. So I can't tell you if they have or haven't looked at any specific book, except to say the Pathfinder design team is a intelligent, well-read, in many cases, very experienced bunch of folks who often have multiple previous RPG editions under their belt. They all worked on Starfinder in one capacity or another. So they're all going to be looking at multiple different places for ideas. That would have been way back in the internal and alpha playtests, and now they are looking at a beta that draws all those things together. So let me finish up my description of alpha and beta. Alpha is sort of when you're kicking the tires to see if any of them fall off. And you can do an alpha playtest with just parts of the game. So if you have, for example, all the skills and enough representative equipment that you can give people different types, and enough armor, and enough spells that can fill together a few PCs, and 4 or 5 different classes, you can do an alpha, because that will tell you, does the initiative system work? Does the health mechanism work? And whatever it is, and I tend to work on D20 games, so I tend to talk in D20 terms. But if you're doing a narrative game, this would be a good time to say, hey, does our description of how narrative decisions work actually produce the results we're looking for? Is it well explained? Do we have the proper flow of ideas? Do people understand what we're talking about? At the alpha level, you want to see, does the core parts of this work as expected, and how much can we tweak them to have them work better than we're expected? And you usually don't want too many people involved in an alpha. Now, it does depend on how big an alpha you want, how much time you're going to put into it, because getting more people's feedback is useful. But feedback also takes time, and I'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to beta. Beta testing is sort of where you say, okay, we have a complete, if smaller in scope, game. So for a beta test, you have to be able to present most of the kinds of ideas that you want in your final game. Now, again, If you're going to have 9 levels of spells in a Vancian spellcasting system type of game, you want to have all 9 levels of spells. You want to have multiple spells at each level, but that doesn't mean you have to have every single spell that's going into the game. You do, if possible, want every kind of spell that will be going into the game. And that's true for feats and equipment and all of the elements. You want to be able to say, this is how we are approaching questions of exploration. This is how we are approaching questions of combat. This is how we're approaching questions of fear and social interaction. All the things that you want to be able to address in your game. You should have the core mechanics and some examples of it for your beta. And then you put that in the hands of as many people as you possibly can. And there are a couple of caveats with that. The first is that not everyone... Is that a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. First, not everyone will work with a PDF, which is the cheap way to put things in people's hands, which means you have to have some sort of print version if you want to get to that broader audience. And either you have to give them an option of printing it, print on demand, or you have to bear the cost and then sell it to them, which is some risk and ties up more of your resources. Or if you were stupidly rich, you could just print them and send them to everyone in the world. But I'm not aware of any company that can do that. So you want some way to put print copies in people's hands one way or the other. The easier it is for people to get print copies, the more people are going to buy in on that. You also need preferably a PDF option because there are a lot of people that, especially if it's not a game in its final form, they're not going to want to have a hardback copy. That's just two very different attitudes, and preferably you want to touch people with both. And then you need a feedback mechanism and a refinement and asking questions mechanism. Some of that can be forums, so those can be the forums on your own website if you have one, or you could run forums on Reddit, or there are various general interest websites. Pick one that is appropriate for your game. If I was doing a D20 game, I might well go with EN World. I know a lot of people do stuff on Reddit. These are just options that you pick, but a place where you are going to be present, where you can say, we are looking at question X, and people can say, this is our experience and our opinion with question X, and you can say, okay, try it with this variant. Okay, try it with this variant. Okay, we've gathered some information. Let's move on to other things.
You're making your table wobble.
Yeah, I know I'm making my table wobble. That's going to have to be something I fix at some point. I just don't think that tonight is the night most likely, although, again, since this is a beta, I just had an idea, so let me see if I can fix the table wobble. The fascinating part of my broadcast where I mess with my camera. It's looking very much like the answer is no. I can't. I can fix the table wobble if you're only looking at the top of my head. I've probably lost 12 viewers just messing with this. Yeah, that's and there's no table wobble there, but that is an unideal solution.
But you can see how we've moved recently, and there's nothing on the bookshelves because we haven't unpacked everything.
Yeah, you totally can. Hold on, I'm going to make one more effort here.
All right, well, while you're doing that, we do have a question.
Okay.
So I'm going to interrupt your...
Yeah, by all means, interrupt my spiel and ask me the question.
Where'd it go? Oh. John Karatovic was clearly... reading your Facebook or the forums earlier today, because he wrote, what was the system in Starfinder that got pulled out at the last minute?
I did, in fact, talk about that, and there's a story relevant to that, and it's actually kind of relevant to the whole feedback mechanism I was talking about. So I will tell the story. I will not tell you what system is involved, and I will explain why I won't tell you what system's involved. There are people in, for instance, Starfinder Society, and people running home games and people trying to learn this with their friends, who have a hard enough time just dealing with the rules as presented in the rule book in a not quite immutable because we do facts, but a sort of solid format, all presented as, here's what we did. As soon as I start telling you, this is the specific system that we changed at the end of the entire design cycle, there will be some people who will take that information and use it to convince their GMs or bother their GMs in an effort to convince them that that system should be changed to something that is more favorable to them. And I just don't want to give them that ammunition, because this is a system that, as of right now, has been very well received, and I think we got it right. But here's the story. There was a game mechanic which tied into pretty much everything in the entire Starfinder RPG, darn near, which was very different from anything we had done in Pathfinder or even alternate Pathfinder products. Not something I'd seen any third-party person go with. It's not a mechanic I came up with, but it was one that I was convinced was the right answer for Starfinder. It answered a lot of questions. It solved a lot of problems. And it was, I thought, if explained properly, not terribly complicated. And in our closed beta playtest, which I still had 100 or more people in, I don't remember the exact number, it was not well received. I would say it was very much not well received. My notes that I looked over suggested that more than 90% of the people who commented on it were negative. Nobody in that group was positive about it. So we thought, well, this is a little more complicated. We thought, or this isn't as well explained as we thought. That is a perfect place for an iteration. That is one of the things that you want to do with a play test. You can say, oh, the rule as we have it in our head, this sort of rule, the Platonian ideal of the rule is still good. We haven't done a great job explaining it. People are misunderstanding it or using some variable language. Or in some cases, right, we explained it one way here, and then someone who's writing had a slightly different idea of it, and they explained it slightly differently here, and those two things don't mesh up. So that's a great thing that playtests can help you find, a place where a rule just needs to be either tweaked or explained differently. So for Starfinder, we tweaked it, and it was still not well received. So we started from scratch and decided to totally rewrite the description of it. And this is another thing that can happen when you are talking about a game that is an iteration of a previous version of rules, like almost all D20 is. It is very, very tempting to say, well, I will take their rule and I will paste it over here and I will rewrite it as necessary. But that can end up with very herky writing because you're altering stuff only as necessary, but then the emphasis and the focus and even the pronouns cannot necessarily line up. So we thought, we all understand it. We know what's going on. We'll rewrite this thing from scratch. And we did. And thought we were pretty good with it. And at that point, the beta was closed, but we were doing some blind internal playtesting, which is blind closed playtesting, which is people that had never seen any version of the rules before were given the rules and told, please make characters and play this game, and we will not explain anything. Everything that you need to know should be here. And these are people with no experience with Starfighter at this point. And we got a 100% massive negative response. It was everybody said some variant of this is terrible, or this is so terrible that if I ran into this in a game, I would never pick up another product in this line, ever. That is like the worst thing you can possibly be told, right? Not only do I not like this rule, but this rule makes me not willing to consider anything in this line. So we were running out of time to get any feedback and anything we were working on. The game was already in layout. We were moving on to other stuff. We were talking about captions for art, etc. But that just told us that, and me specifically, right? I thought this was the right rule, and everybody hadn't liked it. And our best explanation for it led people to hate it more than the worst explanation. The better we explained it, the worse people liked it. So we pulled it. We pulled it entirely. There is not 2 words of that description left in the Starfinder core rulebook. We yanked it. I spent some long hours pulling together a totally different rule set that leaned more on things that we had abandoned early on and that were closer to iterations in other D20 games, so we had a better understanding for how to interact with other systems. I wrote it. Sutter came in, James Sutter, who's the Starfinder brand manager at the time and creative director. He read through it and gave it a development pass, as someone else may have too, and I don't want to shortcut anyone on my team. Everyone was looking at everyone's stuff at that point, so it was very much a group effort. And that was the version that we then took and went to a new set of blind testers, and we said, hey, please make characters, play this game, play these specific kinds of scenarios. And we're not going to explain anything. We're just going to let you go and see how it goes. And it went great. And that has been very well received, released in the wild. So that is the sort of thing where, and this is something that's come up with the second edition Pathfinder playtest too. We're not putting together these playtests and spending hundreds of hours reading forums and questionnaires and feedback and designing questions. And if someone says something really weird, drilling down on whatever they said to see why they're having the reaction they are. Did they misunderstand a rule? That's a lot of time. We're not doing it for funsies. We are doing it to make these games the best games we can. And if it turns out that something we were really, really, really sure was going to be the right thing for the game, if we're wrong, the only point to having these playtests is to be able to say, well, that was a mistake. We'll pull it. We've got time. It's built into the schedule. It's going to be tough. It's going to be extra hours, whatever. And we will replace it with something. So on the Pathfinder playtest forums today, Jason Bullman, who's the director of games at Paizo, said that while there's stuff that is definitely going to be in the playtest because we want you to playtest it, there is nothing that is an immutable law of the final game. If something has a significantly negative reaction, if people overall hate it, everything is on the table to be redesigned or ditched and replaced. We're not talking about design by committee, right? It's not that if 51% of you vote to hate it, or if 5 people hate it and they post often enough, it'll get taken out. But we are going to be looking at what makes for the best game, because the best game will sell the best, and that's sort of what Paizo as a company is interested in doing. And really, a lot of game companies want the best game, at least within the oeuvre that they want to do, so that they have the best satisfaction, people have the most fun, and they make the most money. That's part of the point. I thought it was getting signals that we had more questions.
I'm not sure how serious the question
That's
is.
fine. Let's have a non-serious question.
Thomas Plainsight says, is the rule related to the priest? And if so, does that mean that the Book of Vile Darkness is going to be part of PF2? First, I think you should explain
was one of the earliest cities that we think existed, and as a result is used as a term to mean the sort of the first of its kind from before all those things came together. And now that I've said that, someone's going to tell me I'm wrong. But so when we talk about an rule, especially when we're talking about, or when I do, because I don't hear that term very often, if I'm being honest with you. If I say rule, and I'm talking about a game system, I'm like, here was our first idea, this is what we were doing, and then things have iterated on beyond that. So, and no, it is not tied to the priest. The priest is not open game content, and as a result, you will not be seeing the priest or pretty much anything from the Book of Vile Darkness, none of which is open content in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, at least not on purpose. Sometimes you do have things that are parallel design. I literally had a feat that I wrote be duplicated nearly word for word in a competitor's product, and a fan said, hey, I see you took this feat from Rogue Genius, or actually at the time it was Super Genius, from Super Genius, and you didn't put them in your section 15. Then another publisher said, oh, Owen, did you work on this? Did we take this from you? I don't think you worked on it. And I read it. And because, for me, it was something I was building off something in the core rulebook, and I was using the kind of language that was used for that kind of feat, when the other writer/developer said, no, that was parallel development, I believed him. I could easily see someone else coming along and making nearly word for word the same rule. That publisher, as it happens, ended up saying, well, no harm to add you to section 15, give you credit whether it's actually coming or not, and then that solves that issue, which is one of the nice things about the open game licenses that sort of creates a safe harbor where, if you say, hey, you violated my section 15, they have the opportunity to go, oh, our bad, we'll fix it, which happens all the time. The feedback process. Frequently when you are talking about a role-playing game, other games too, but especially something as complicated as a role-playing game tends to be, you frequently have interactive pieces, and you need to know how they work individually and how they work together. And that's really pretty important, and it can be very difficult to do. For example, and sometimes people are playtesting stuff that isn't something you care to playtest. For example, if I'm writing Starfinder and I say this is a interactive game where multiple players work together against villains and creatures run by a GM, if that is what the purpose of the game is, and someone comes along and says, well, I took my player character and I fought his player character, and my player character will always beat his player character, I don't care. I don't care, because that is not part of what we're trying to do in that game. I hear him saying if. I do, as the lead designer of Starfinder, I do very much feel it is an interactive game where we are trying to get players to work together towards a purpose. And so as long as having any given player benefits the group, I'm happy. That doesn't mean that's Paizo's design goal, or that's everyone in Starfinder's design goal. But it's an example of, like, one of the things that happened with the Star Wars role-playing game is that several people at one point said there's no good way to play a freighter crew who's just flying around from place to place trying to make money, because there isn't enough information on what it costs to buy stuff, what it costs to ship it. LJ, that's showing up on screen.
Oh, sorry, I'm playing with our cat who's been complaining.
Do it over there. Don't bounce it off me. Stop it.
All right, fine.
There's no good way to figure out all those economics for a viable game system. And here I'm talking about the D20 Star Wars game from Wizards of the Coast that I worked on. And our response to that was, no, there isn't. This is not designed to be the Trade Winds computer game where the whole point is to do trading and combat sort of just comes in as a side concern. This is an adventure game. We're only doing pricing and economics and shipping stuff as they relate to running around and having adventures like Star Wars. If you are finding that you do not have a successful representation of your Bith Cantina Band group, that's because you have gone outside what we're trying to do in the game. We're not trying to create something that perfectly simulates everything you can possibly do in the Star Wars universe. We're trying to make an action-adventure RPG. So that is one of the reasons why you want direction with play testing, right? Because someone could come back and they say, well, this economy doesn't work. You're like, okay, well, why doesn't the economy work? Well, the economy doesn't work because I can't create Walmart in this setting. We don't want you to create Walmart in this setting. That is not what we're trying to support with this. And so you want to set expectations and have a feedback mechanism where when you get feedback, you can figure out what that is relating. Looks like we got a question.
Yes, from John Karatovic. There's a lot of vocal complaints about the inclusion of goblins. He means as a player race.
As a player race, I'll get to that.
But also there's some excitement and support too. How heavily do designers weigh positive and negative feedback like we're seeing in the message boards?
So what he's talking about is that it was revealed in a blog, and we've been talking about it for a while, but a recent Paizo blog specifically showed some of what it was going to be like to have goblins as a core race in the Pathfinder playtest. Now, the Pathfinder playtest book is getting put together, and we want to playtest these things. So while it's not my call, and I'm not speaking as a Paizo employee, just as an observer of the industry, I would strongly suspect that the goblins are definitely going to be in the playtest, because otherwise people are reacting to what they think it's going to say instead of what it says. The whole point of having a playtest is to playtest these things. But Jason Bowman also stated today that there is nothing that isn't on the potential table to be removed. So that's what we're discussing. And there's certainly a lot of threads where people are talking about the pros and cons as Goblin PCs from a mechanical point of view, from a sociological point of view, from a Galarian lore point of view. Those are all legitimate points of view. The question, therefore, that we are being asked is, how much do designers and developers weigh those opinions against what they think? And there is no set and dried answer to that, right? We're not going to say that if 70% of the posts about this are negative, it's gone, right? You have to, as a professional, be able to sort through the feedback and determine how much of this is a few people who are unhappy, how much of this is people that want something else, right? I don't care about the goblin, but you didn't give me ASMRs, so I'm going to say that goblins are terrible, so I get an ASMRs. And then legitimately, how much are the people that say that they actively don't like it and here are the problems with it, just honestly right? And if they're right, how big are those problems and how much weight do we need to give that? And there's just no set answer for that. You got to look at what is our goal with the game, what is our target audience with the game, and how well will sticking with our guns on this or adjusting it rather than getting rid of it or possibly saving it and releasing it in a later book, how does that match our goals? When we were working on Starfinder, right, we had specific design guidelines. The biggest one of which was to make the best space fantasy, science fantasy game we could set in the future of the Pathfinder universe that would be familiar to people that had played Pathfinder, right? That sentence, a little wibbly wobbly, was our design goal. So if, for example, someone said, well, I don't like androids because androids in Pathfinder look just exactly like humans and you can't tell the difference, and your androids have circuitry and interesting colored hair and color eyes, and they're clearly androids. And then we're looking at feedback over years of art, right? People saying, well, you always say that they look perfectly like androids, but artists keep drawing them as more interesting so you can tell that they're just not humans. Do we, from an interesting design space, want two races that look just like humans, which limits the total sort of design options you have there? We can perfectly well, if we think it's important, and we could have earlier, but the feedback wasn't like this. This is just an example. We could create a option that's either of various different species feature or a feat you can pick up or an archetype. There are all sorts of ways we can do it and say, hey, androids can look exactly like humans if they want to. But in that case, you've got two groups. One who might say we want them to look exactly like humans, what the lore says. And the other one's saying we think this would be more fun if we can look like androids with cool circuitry tattoos and stuff like that. And then you say, well, which of these things is better for the best science fantasy game that is familiar to people who know Pathfinder and set in the Galarian universe? So we're far enough in the future that we can easily say, hey, androids have changed some. That's not a problem. They aren't even necessarily from the same source, these androids, as the androids you've seen in Pathfinder. And do we think it is better for a science fantasy game to have androids look different and be visually different and interesting and give players that want that an option? Or do we think it's better if they look just like humans? And I can tell you, right, that was an issue that came up not heavily. There was not anything like the Goblin backlash. This is, again, just for illustrative purposes. But our decision was pretty firmly, yes, it's meaning that it's not exactly like it was in Pathfinder, but we think that's better for the game we're doing. So you have to take that feedback and ask yourself, how strong is it? How disruptive is it seem to be for the people involved? How much effort is it to remove it? And what is best for the game we want to make? So there's no cut and dried answer on those things. And I trust that team to make the right decisions for these things.
Okay, you ready for another couple questions?
I am ready for another couple questions.
Going way back to talking about economy, Jacob Blackman asked, how much should a shipping captain charge for passengers in Starfinder? Which I suspect was also kind of a joke question, but let's ask. Do you have an answer?
I do. They should charge exactly as much as will work well for the plot that the GM wants for the adventure. We do have some travel pricing and services that you can buy. I believe there's some in the core rulebook, and if it's not in the core rulebook, then it is something that has passed my eyes and will be coming out in a book you guys don't have yet. So we give some guidelines for that, right? But the honest answer is, my father was a professor of economics at the University of Oklahoma, and this is what I took away. There ain't no such thing as a free lunch, and even economists don't actually know how the economy works. So if we attempt a realistic economy, first of all, it's going to take a lot of time and research that will delay how long it takes to put together the game. And we're going to have to introduce stuff that a lot of what we believe to be our player base won't find to be fun. That does mean that there are people who would like that information who aren't going to get it, and that's unfortunate. But if we put it in, we would have to take something else out. The amount of time it would take to handle all of those issues. This is why D20 Modern, for example, had a wealth check, because when they were writing D20 Modern, the people at Wizards of the Coast thought that with credit cards and loans and being able to take out a second mortgage on your house and your paycheck to paycheck, or you might, you could have a job on the side. We don't want to actually model all of that, but we need something that is more wibbly wobbly than gold pieces. So we'll create the wealth check so that you're never sure whether you can afford something or not to represent all that stuff. And I've heard several reviewers who I trust and other designers say that the wealth check is a brilliant solution to a problem no one had. And that is an example of what can happen if you try to focus on elements of a universe that aren't important to the stories you expect people to be telling with this game. The other thing, of course, is that this is an OGL D20 game. So if there is a demand for a more realistic or more involved or even more detailed economy, then you all should be making those demands to third-party publishers so that they will provide that for you.
Harold Nichols says it's on page 235, table 740, transportation.
Okay, so there are transportation costs. That'll give you some idea.
I just have to read this out loud because it's hysterical. John Karatovic, 2,000 credits now and 17,000 when you get to Eldoran.
Exactly, right.
And no Aslandi imperial entanglements. And
no questions asked. Just me, the boy, and the droids. I don't know. That's when I was working on the Star Wars role-playing game, one of the frustrating things about the economy is that if we assume Luke is right, that price, which is the amount of money he can get for a beat-up used speeder that we're told isn't bringing in what it was just a few years ago because of the new model, that price is almost enough to buy his own starship. That's one of the few concrete pieces of data about the economy we have from the movies. And that's like saying, well, I sold my old VW van, and that's almost enough money to buy my own tramp steamer. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense for most economic purposes. You can hand wave it some, and if you want people to easily be able to get starships, maybe you make starships cheap. But then you also get to the question of, hey, this group has spent money on a really cool starship, so they're really well prepared for starship combat. This group didn't pay any money for starships, so they can't even get into starship combat unless the GM gives them a ship, because they have spent all their money on E-Web repeating blasters and thermal detonators, so they are over-prepared for personal combat. Those economy questions can get complicated fast. And the more modern a setting is, the more people expect it to make sense, which itself honestly doesn't make a lot of sense.
So, you were describing some races earlier.
Yeah, species, yes.
Jacob Blackman says, oh, and any insight on future Real Wild West articles after the races you are currently describing at the time?
So, Really Wild West, for those of you that don't know, is a setting hack I'm using to do Weird West, almost steampunky stuff, but 1891 with advanced technology, Martian tripods, and magic and strange species all present. I'm using the Starfinder rules to describe to run a campaign that has all this weird stuff. So that's why I'm calling it a setting hack. And I'm doing it on my website, owenkcstevens.com. And currently, I'm talking about places where we can put major population centers of the Starfinder races, like Lashunta and Kasatha, in a imaginary 1891 of the real world. So the question is, what am I going to do after that? I still have some more weapon things that I want to put together. I may have more Starfaring Gunslinger rules. Certainly when I am finished with those, I will be talking about how to use them in the Really Wild West, but I've got a pretty big document that is probably going to turn into an actual PDF that some people got to see previews of. Anyone who's part of my Patreon got to see more of those rules than even I put on my website. And then we have announced recently that along with Alex Agunas and Param of No Direction, we're going to be doing the RPG Design Club, where the three of us are going to be taking RPG projects of ours and taking you through the steps from concept to finished game. And the project I will be doing that with is the Really Wild West. So the end goal eventually is to have a setting book / setting hack for the Really Wild West, maybe an adventure, and if not, a bunch of adventure seeds. I have an adventure, Blood Lake, written by Rich Redmond, it was for Anachronistic Adventures, which we have not managed to put out, which I might reboot to be for Really Wild West. So I might redo my Gulchers from my Guns of Tarnation setting for Starfinder. There's some things I'm thinking about doing. I've got several half-written articles that should come out in the next few weeks. Yes, LJ.
Jim Groves has a question for you.
Yep.
This is something of a general campaign setting question in relation to PF2. Are developers going to retain dibs on specific territories? As examples, Eric Mona owns Nex, Sutter owns Hermea, Wes owns Ustalev, although he says, I'm not referring to any specific situation. In fact, many of those examples are now outdated. Yeah, I mean,
Sutter and Wes have moved on to other opportunities from Paizo. I don't know. And if I do, I'm not sure it'd be appropriate for me to discuss it. Certainly, there are people who are considered within the company to be more expert on specific regions. But we also have a Pathfinder creative director, James Jacobs, who sort of, at this point, has a great deal of input on how everything goes. And a lot of not all of the campaign is based on his own setting, but a lot of that is based on his original D&D setting. And we have a franchise manager, Mark Moreland, who's keeping an eye on a lot of that stuff. So I would say that with all our new hires and with the sort of creation of new positions, the paradigm of how Paizo decides internally who works on what has changed somewhat. Certainly one of the things that's going to happen when we have a second edition Pathfinder role-playing game book is that we will have to describe the state of the world at that point. I'm not currently on the team of people that are doing that. I've got Starfinder, and that has me plenty busy. So I think there are still people who are going to be very, very much involved in what is and isn't released for specific regions. Eric Mona created Nex. Eric Mona likes being the person that decides what we're doing with Nex. Eric Mona is the publisher at Paizo, so that probably is not, in the grand scheme of things, changing. But even when I was working on the player companion line, right, I was able to say, hey, Eric, it'd be really cool if we, for example, created a Nexian version of the Mesmerist, because that Third Eye occultist stuff has already been referenced in Nex. There were already people from Jamoray who went to Nex, so there are these tie-ins. Can I run some ideas by you, have you approve them, make sure they're what you like, have someone write them, develop them, etc.? So where we want to discuss an area, where the company feels it's in its best interest, obviously we want people who have a strong involvement, who's in the company, to be able to work on that, because that is satisfying, and why not have happy, satisfied employees? But I don't think it's going to be the sort of thing where we say, well, this person is busy, so Thurston Hillman isn't free to work on Druma, so Druma just isn't happening, right? I don't think that's going to happen. But again, I don't know. That's me guessing from the outside, really. And Jim, like me, has done a lot of freelance for Paizo, so you sort of get a feel, even when you're on the outside, of how some of these things work. But the company has grown quite a bit, and we're tackling a lot of brand new things. And I think it's safe to say that everything is on the table on how we're going to handle stuff and what we're going to decide to do with it. You have more questions?
No.
Okay, we are out of questions. So I just want to wrap up a little bit about playtesting, because we're also getting close to out of time. When you have got all the data that you can possibly get from playtesting, there is a point where, if you're going to hit a print deadline, and those print deadlines are frequently print windows, where if it's not a case as if we miss it by a week, the book will be 1 week late. Apparently we have a question which we'll get to in a sec. It's frequently a case of, if we miss this print window, we don't get another one for a month and a half. And then if you have subscriptions, the subscribers aren't getting it on time. If you have it going through distribution and you've done solicitations, physical brick and mortar game stores are budgeting their money to buy that book in a specific period of time. And if you don't get it to them, you can make their life difficult. There comes a point where you have to go, this is all the time we have for this book. We do the best version we can. Hopefully you still do some internal playtesting on any major changes. Hopefully you have time to get a blind group together towards the end, as we did with Starfinder, and say, you know nothing about this, go. But then it has to go to print. And when you are a playtester, it is not your job to fix the game mechanics. It's your job to explain the problem. The game designers will fix the game mechanics. That's my point of view. I don't know if that's the point of view that any specific playtest upcoming that might, for example, be launched in August will take. But a good playtester says, this is what happened. This is how we interpreted it. This is why it's a problem. This is what happened. And you don't then say, it'd be better if you, because you don't know what other feedback's going on. You don't know what ideas haven't been had. And let's be honest, you're not the professional that the company is paying for to make the best possible game. So my advice, if you're playtesting and you want the best game, is to be very, very clear about what the problem was, whether it was mechanical or feel or your opinion or what. Post that, and then trust the people making the game to make the smartest decisions they can. Now, apparently we do have another question.
Yes. John Karatovic. It's still early in the life cycle of Starfinder. Will we see open playtesting for later rules-heavy releases for that game?
So, for most of Paizo's life, when a new character class was going to come out for Pathfinder, there was an open playtest for that character class. That did not happen universally. I believe the Shifter, for example, didn't get one. And we didn't do any open playtest for Starfinder. We just did closed playtests. A lot of that is a scheduling and resource question. And there are already people who are telling us that they want to pay less for our role-playing games, and they massively outweigh the people that are telling us they want to play more for our role-playing games, if that means that we have playtested them longer. And time is money when you're talking about paying developers, how many products you can get out, how many pages one employee can produce per year is relevant when you're deciding what the price point is. There are possibly ways that you can handle some of those things, but I can honestly say right now, the answer to the question, will there be open playtests, or even for that matter, large closed playtests as opposed to purely internal ones, for rules-heavy books for Starfinder, is we don't know. We have not scheduled that kind of product yet. It's certainly not something I'm working on yet, right? I mean, we have announced both Armory and Alien Archive 2, and those are both things where we have a set of math we can build everything off of, and that set of math was already play tested, unlike, say, introducing a new character class, or if we were to decide that we were going to have a new rule set on human beings that can transform into mecha, and then 5 of them can transform into a giant mecha, right? That would be a whole new rule subset that would need to be play tested against the whole game. We haven't tackled that kind of product yet, so I don't know how we're going to handle it. And some of it is going to be how many employees do we have, and how much time do we have, and how well are current books selling. I'll be honest with you, the best way to get more playtesting done of these books is to buy as many copies of the current books as you possibly feel like you can, because the better these sell, the more the reaction is, well, these make a fair amount of money. Let's make sure we don't kill the golden goose. Let's take the time to put extra effort into this one so that the line remains popular. I'm not the project manager at Paizo. I'm not the creative director for Starfinder. So I will put in all the playtesting as the design lead I can, which is not always any.
Apparently people have interest in a Dragonsteel book.
Yeah, Dragonsteel will probably not ever show up in a Starfinder product. If you want your Dragonsteel, go to the Advanced Player's Manual from 2004. Actually, I guess I put that in the Advanced Game Mastery Guide, which might be 2004 to 2005 from Green Ronin. It's right in there, and that's designed to be fairly generic. You can pick it up and use it in that. And that's not the answer that the person who posted that wants to hear, but that's my honest, most likely answer. All right, do we have any more questions?
No, but the cat has the zips, so if you guys are hearing her.
So that brings us to the end of my discussion on playtesting in general, how it works at the Q&A section. So if anyone has any other questions they want to ask, this is a good time to do it. As I said, this entire process remains very, very beta for me. I'm still trying to figure out what the format of the show is. And this is the first time that we walked into the show with a topic. So please feel free to give us feedback, because this is essentially a playtest, because it's a test run. Let us know if you liked having a topic. Let us know if you liked this topic. Let us know if there's topics you'd like to see us cover in future shows. Let us know if you like the Q&A segment. Let us know if you'd like to see guests. Let us know if you'd like me to wear a different shirt. Whatever it is that you would like to see in this, let us know, and we'll see if those are suggestions we can integrate and try and produce an actual format for the show. Right? I mean, the name is very much temporary. I have not started numbering these things yet, etc. And I will eventually probably start uploading these on YouTube. But if you've got any general questions or things you want us to cover, just let us know. And of course, if you want to support me doing these things, the easiest way to do that is through my Patreon, which I'm reasonably sure my wife will put a link to in the comments. But just in case, I will go ahead and tell you that
I've done that once already. I'll do it again.
But it's patreon.com/Owen Casey Stevens is my Patreon. So
with a PH.
Yes, STEP /Owen KC STEPHENS. So thank you all for being here for the Aftergame. I hope you all had a good time, and the plan is that we will see you all next week. Thanks for being with us.